how much fun did you have as Bester from Psychor on Babylon 5?
I had a great time. That's probably the high point of my career as an actor on television, is working on that show. The character was, had some complexity, had some levels, some nuance, and each time he appeared, he was pivotal to the story. So I always felt that I was making a contribution. And if you read between the lines, obviously, that's in comparison to Star Trek, which I will be forever grateful. God knows I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Star Trek. But it was not necessarily as artistically rewarding as working on Babylon 5.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Koenig.
Hi.
So my daughter and my son came home for Thanksgiving, and they said, "Hey, Pop, we bet we saw something you've never seen before," and they showed me the Futurama episode where all you guys did the voice characters, and I'm like aghast. I can't believe I've missed that. So I need to one-up them. Do you have anything coming in the future I might know about and I can surprise them?
Wow. I'm saying wow because I didn't understand 90% of what you said.
I apologize.
Mostly it's my hearing. Yes.
So my son and daughter showed
Yes.
me an episode of Futurama that you
Oh, yeah,
all
that
were
was
in,
fun. That was
and
great.
I'd never seen it, so they had one over on me.
Oh.
I want to get back at them. Do you have an episode, or are you doing some work that's coming up in the future that I can say, "Hey guys, I got something I know about Mr. Koenig"?
Well, I wish I could tell you that I had an abundance of offers and I'm making selections now. That's not necessarily the case. I did get an invitation to work in a film, probably to be shot in Portland, but I don't know the particulars of that yet. For what it's worth, and it's pretty obscure, there was since you mentioned Futurama, there was an animated series that I think you can get on Netflix called Stretch Armstrong, and I did voiceover in about 9 or 10 episodes of that.
I bet they don't know about it. I'll check it out, sir.
Yeah, I don't think they know about it 'cause I don't think they've done much promotion of that show. So that's something.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Take care.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm sure you've gotten this before, but when I was a kid and I saw Wrath of Khan for the first time, I saw the scene where, and I'm not sure, I'm at a loss as to what it was called, the bug thing that goes in your ear scarred me for life. I still have a phobia. Was that uncomfortable to shoot? Did it unease you at all to have to scream and have the bug in your ear?
Well, that was a North African bug that was required being shipped in across the world, practically.
Wow.
Yeah, it cost thousands of dollars.
Oh my gosh.
And they only had one.
Oh my gosh.
So we were very, very careful. I'm making this all up.
Oh, okay. I totally fell for that. I love you. I was like, what, really? No.
What it was a slimy, it was a little plastic rubber thing.
Nice.
They dipped in some goo, and they drilled a hole in the helmet that I was wearing, the thing.
Yeah.
And there was a guy standing behind me and above me, and there was a very fine filament that it was attached to, and he pulled it up my face, on the end of this filament, and they stuck it in my ear. And when it came out, I actually went to Lucasfilms. I went up north to where they're located, and they put me on a table that had the same material that was on the floor when I fell down and screamed and it came out of my ear.
Yeah.
We shot that weeks after we finished shooting everything else.
Oh, wow.
So they put that material on a table, and they had me lie on the table, and they drilled a hole in the table, and there was a guy under the table, and they stuck it in my ear again.
No.
And he pulled it out from underneath the table. And then they had another shot, which was a close-up, which is a sculptured ear that was 3 or 4 times the size of a regular ear. And they actually constructed a little creature that had more definition and would fit that orifice. So that was all it was all make believe. There was nothing I had to worry
believe
about.
you. I can't. I don't know. I literally have a phobia of things going in my ears now. So thank you for your great acting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, so I have another question. So from Star Trek, how exactly did you get your role as Bester?
That's an interesting. It's a question I haven't been asked.
Like, how did you go from Star Trek to Bester?
Yeah, but you got to understand, first of all, an actor is an actor is an actor, and the whole idea is that you're not supposed to be limited in your talent to playing one specific character. You're supposed to have there should be some breadth to what you can do. I think I was just commenting to myself. Not out loud. I don't do that yet.
You sure?
I'm in my 80s, but I don't talk to myself out loud. But I was wondering why are people so, and it is the case. I'm not just patting myself on the back. Why are people so positive about my performance as Bester? What is it that they saw that has generated this enthusiasm? And I think part of it is the comparison to having played Chekhov, that this was such a departure that they perhaps assume that means that there's versatility there that that they were surprised by. The fact of the matter is, if you're an actor, you're supposed to be able to play lots of different characters and different roles and different attitudes and coming from different places and all of that. So it's not truly unique to me. It's just what actors should do. I mean, there are actors who play the same character, whatever they're doing, and those are they're movie stars frequently.
May I answer your question that you asked yourself on a personal level? On a personal level, for me, the way you played Bester was the iconic what I think of when I think of a bad guy. He's cold, he's calculated. He will not regret what he does to you as long as it's for his cause or the cause of Psi Corps. So whenever I think of a genuine bad guy, I always think of Bester.
Oh, that's good. But I don't think, when people ask me how I feel about playing a bad guy, my reaction is that I don't feel like I've played a bad guy. In order to be able to, you cannot editorialize the character you're playing. You commit to it. You believe in the character. Otherwise, you're pretending. Otherwise, it's imitation. So you try to make it as truthful and as honest as you can, so that the people who are watching you will believe, that they're watching somebody who is that way. So I find I don't go into it thinking I'm playing a bad guy. I go into thinking I'm playing a guy with a particular sense of values and a particular justification and a cause, and he's committed to those things, and it's about doing what is best for his people. It's not what Walter Koenig would do as Walter Koenig, but you grope around inside yourself and you find those elements, and they're there in all of us. Don't believe that we're all, there's anybody that's 100%, human and sweet and charming and lovely. We all have those feelings. We've learned through the process of socialization that we don't practice any of that. We don't make that part of our lives. At least most of us don't. But human beings are complex, and what actors do is they just are able to reach those parts of their character. They're able to be able to make them surface, to be able to deal with them, to handle them in a way that that audiences will, think of them as boy, am I screwing up here? But think of them as being real, and that's the whole point. You got to make it as real as you can for yourself, in order to make the audience feel, in order to make the audience believe what you're saying, what you're doing. Okay.
Slightly off topic, but how did you meet your wife?
I met my wife at a Christmas party. It was 1962, and I found out that she was a young actress and that she was trying to get going in the business. And I asked her to do a scene with me for a theater company. And we did the scene. We were both accepted in the company, and then we started dating after that.
Cool, thank you.
Okay.
Hello, Mr. Koenig. Did I pronounce your last name correct?
No,
Oh, I did?
it's okay. It's Koenig.
What is it again?
Koenig.
Koenig. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anyway, it's an honor to meet you.
Thank you.
I've watched Star Trek since I was a little kid. It sparked an interest in me in the sciences, along with the lunar landings that were happening at the time. And today I have a job in electronics. I've been involved in amateur astronomy for over 30 years. And so I guess my question to you would be, do you have any interests or hobbies outside of acting that you enjoy?
Well, I'm an inveterate, obsessive-compulsive collector of comic memorabilia. Not comic books, but comic figurines, comic pinback buttons, and it goes back, gum cards, it goes back to the turn of the 20th century. There was the first comic character in newspapers was the Yellow Kid, and they called me Yellow Kid because Hearst, who owned the chain, this is the first comic, not only in the comic in the newspapers, but that was actually printed in yellow. He wore a yellow nightshirt, and the name of the strip was Hogan's Alley. It was one big panel showing everything that was going around in the streets, and so my collection goes back to 1896, and a lot of the stuff is from the 20s and the 30s. Figurines, I have lots of figurines. And my cutoff place is about 1968. So from 1896 to 1968, I actually had a second story built on my house. I told you I was obsessive compulsive to accommodate my collection.
Thank you, Mr.
Sure.
Koenig?
Koenig.
Koenig.
Yes, sir.
There's an episode I've heard a lot about called The Infinite Vulcan, and that is the one you wrote for the animated series. The one thing I've never heard of is, what was your original draft or idea for that episode?
Are you telling me that you thought that was a failure and was my original draft better? Is that what you're saying?
No, the stories I heard was that it was sent through the editorial grinder and that there were a lot of changes made.
There were changes made.
And I actually assumed that was beyond your
I got
control.
so tired of it, I can't begin to tell you. I found out later that Gene Roddenberry really wanted to be involved in every stage of the writing of the series. There's a wonderful trilogy called These Are the Voyages? Yeah, I think that's called These Are the Voyages. It's 3 volumes that a gentleman named Mark Cushman wrote about what happened back behind the camera. And you guys should if you're interested in that kind of thing, you should really get a hold of it. It's so edifying. It really gives you the whole process of how a script goes from the first draft to final draft, to teleplay. These Are the Voyages. It's each volume is one season of the show. So yeah, the answer to your question is I did about 10 drafts, and Gene kept asking for changes. I did not have talking plants in the first draft, but he said, we're doing animation. We can do anything we want. Let's have plants that talked. So we put that in. My original premise was topical in nature. It was a time when they were talking about what's the word? Regeneration and creating beings that were replicants of their parents. What's the word I'm thinking of?
Cloning.
Yes, that's the word. So that's where my idea came from. And but I cannot tell you in detail what were the changes. It just that it drove me crazy. And when they asked me to do a second episode, I said, thank you, but no. Yeah.
Actually, I think I like your original version better, but thanks.
Thank you. Okay.
It's such an honor to meet you, sir.
Thank you.
On the original Star Trek, they had such good writers on those episodes, but were there any ad libs? Did you make up things in addition to the script?
That's an interesting question. I think Bill and Leonard had conversations behind closed doors, about their characters. They were both very, involved in the way their characters were presented, which is certainly understandable. It got a little out of hand during the series days, I understand. Again, this all happened behind closed doors, and I can't give you any details, but I know there was a very passionate competition between them, at least initially, as to who had the most lines, and I talked to one writer who was visited by Mr. Shatner to encourage him to write the Kirk a little more expansively than it had been in the draft that the writer had done. So, but no, I was along for the ride. I was the new kid on the block. I was there to just do the work and go home. I did not feel I could exercise any influence on how the character was written. They just gave me free rein to interpret it the way I did. Nobody ever said do something different. So I guess I was doing. I guess that was
right.
okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm
Hi.
Paul, so glad you're here. So I really loved your character on Babylon 5, or maybe love to hate your character on Babylon
Right.
5. I know J. Michael Straczynski was kind of known for doing pretty extensive backstories, so I was kind of wondering, how much did you get a backstory to help inform you? I know there was so much, some of it even ended up in novels. And how much did you kind of make up your own backstory?
It's interesting that you should say that. I'll make this very, very brief because I have a tendency to ramble. When Joe Straczynski approached me about being on Babylon 5, he had another character in mind. And I was to do this particular role, which would have been a one-shot. But I had a very inconvenient heart attack on a quadruple bypass, and I wasn't available. I was in the hospital when they were shooting this. I had to call Joe and say, and I didn't know him well. I knew him casually. I said, I'm not going to be ready. So he says, okay, we'll find something else for you. And I thought, well, that's the end of that. People have a tendency to say something like that, and then, God, can I get some water? I know, I think I probably turned it down. Anybody back there? Anyway, much to my surprise, he hadn't forgotten, and he turned into Bester, which is, they had to shoot the episode, thank you. They had to shoot the episode that I was originally going to do because they ran out of scripts. But while I was convalescing, Joe wrote this other character, just handed it to me and said, this is the guy you're playing. So it was pretty much, not pretty much, up to me almost exclusively to render this character and to make the interpretation. And it's something that I found I could relate to. As I said, we're more than one thing. And through the process of becoming citizens and and law-abiding human beings, we don't give in to impulses or express feelings that are antisocial, or certainly aggressively antisocial. But they're there, and I just picked away at what I could relate to and how I could justify it and not feel guilty. I had to be able to embrace the character and not feel that I was doing something that my conscience was opposed to. And the fun of playing Bester was that Joe kept writing his evolution. He kept changing, and I had to find a way to justify that. How do I justify this with what he had done before? There were certain contradictions in behavior that I had to somehow blend together to make a whole person out of it, which is what we are. We're a blend of lots of impulses and feelings and attitudes. And so it was great fun for me to find how to keep the character consistent while seeing him change episode to episode.
All right. Yeah, you did a great job.
Okay.
Good evening, sir. I had a question about Star Trek 4. There's a scene I loved as a kid, and William Shatner looks at you and says, name, rank, and you say, Chekhov, Paulo, rank, Admiral.
Yeah.
Was that improv? Because it looks like you guys had really a lot of fun making that scene in the hospital.
It was fun. Yeah, that was fun. Occasionally they threw some funny line or something for Chekhov, and I always enjoyed that. That was always, gave him some distinction. My complaint is, as would any actors would have been, I think, just wanted more to do. As Chekhov. The character was fun. I liked playing an outgoing character. As a matter of fact, when I was in drama school, after I graduated college, I went to drama school for 2 years. The most profound statement that was made to me by a teacher, and one that really opened up the world as an actor for me, was when I was doing a part in a play there, and he said to me, Walter, it was a play called Golden Boy, and it was about a boxer. And the boxer was a good boxer, but he also had a problem with his eyes. He had strabismus, or he had something wrong with his eyes, so they were weak. And instinctively, what I grabbed onto, not that he was a boxer, but that he had weak eyes. And that's what I played. So what the instructor said to me is, you're sort of missing the point, Walter. Your personal comment on life is self-pity, which was a blow to hear, but it took me about 20 seconds to realize how familiar that sounded, how right that sounded. I said to myself, my God, that is what I do. I was a loner. I was a kid that didn't have a lot of friends, and I guess I felt sorry for myself a lot. And then when I realized that there's certainly more to me than that, I learned to play this guy differently. And I played him much more pugnaciously, much more not mean, but just aggressive personality. And I was able to bring that to the part of Chekhov. And I might not have been if somebody hadn't been insightful enough to point that out to me, that my approach was limiting what I could do as an actor. I don't know. Did I answer it?
Oh, well, I was wondering, for some reason, I always thought that when you said Admiral, it was improv.
You thought what?
I thought it was improv. I thought you came up with that on your own.
No. The only improv we ever did, in terms of the character, whatever you saw is what I brought to it. Nobody said to me, do this or do that or change this or change that. The only improv was the scene in The Voyage Home, which everybody pretty much knows, the nuclear vessels scene.
I gotcha.
That was totally improv.
Well, I do thank you for your time, sir, and you've always been one of my favorite actors.
Speaking of Chekhov, did you have
What else are we talking about?
Did you have a chance to meet Anton Yelchin?
Yes, I did.
Any comments on his performance?
J.J. Abrams invited me to watch them shoot the first movie, invited me to the set. And I thought that was great, how nice. And I went down there, and Anton, I think, was off that day. But somebody put a call into him saying that I was hanging out at the set, and he came to visit. And I found him to be a terrific young man, just a really neat fellow, and very bright, and obviously very talented. And we spoke for a couple of hours, and I was really pleased to have met him. And but you know, it's an interesting thing. Talk about what you learn about yourself and how it's a continuing process, or it should be. It should be. We should be learning about ourselves through the whole of our lives, I think. When I went to see the premiere, and I was going to see this young, good-looking guy who was 50 years younger than I was, playing Chekhov, how was I going to respond to that? Was I didn't know whether I would be pleased or whether I would feel petty about it. Would I be critical? Would I feel, jealous or belittled or whatever? All those thoughts ran through my mind. So I didn't know how I was going to relate to that. As it turned out, I was able to thoroughly immerse myself in the experience and enjoy the production and particularly Anton's work enormously. Well, that's great. Not only is he a very good actor, but I'm a pretty good person. I could be generous with how I felt about him. It was a delight to watch him work. It's an extraordinary tragedy. It's an extraordinary tragedy that he passed away so young. The only other time I spoke to him was at the premiere, and it was after the film was over, and he, of course, had, like all the regulars on the new film, he was mobbed. There were many people around him, mostly, the media, and he saw me walking behind the crowd, and he yelled out, "Walter, I've got an action figure." So yeah, it was a delightful young man and a great loss. Great loss.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for coming to be here with us today. Question I had for you is: have you ever been to Russia? And
Yes.
if you were, how did they treat? If you did go, how did they treat you?
Yeah, the interesting thing is, it was a convention, fan convention, but not a Star Trek fan convention. Star Trek played late at night in Russia, but Babylon 5 was on prime time. So a group of Russian fans of Babylon 5, I guess they knew that I had played Chekhov on Star Trek, but it was definitely a Babylon 5 convention. I went to Moscow and St. Petersburg, so I was there several days beyond the convention. Fans, the amazing thing is, and maybe the secret to how we can get this world together, because it's certainly broken as far as I can tell, is maybe make everybody a Star Trek fan, because wherever I go, the Star Trek fans, they're all terrific. The people who are into Star Trek and Babylon 5, and they like each other. They're a captive audience. You got to do a lot bad to do wrong by them, so I always feel very welcome and very supported wherever I've been. I can't think of a bad experience that I've had. I can't think of a bad experience that I've had. But it was history. My parents were from there, were from the Soviet Union. So seeing Moscow and seeing the Red Square and going to St. Petersburg, there is a wonderful museum in St. Petersburg that had been the home of Catherine, the Empress of Russia, Catherine the Great. So got to tour that. And the subways are remarkable. each subway is a work of art, each subway station. They have mosaics and all sorts of extraordinary art all over. So this was about it. This was, preceding the current administration. And it was a good time to be there. It was a good time to be there. I really had a nice, and we had two people who, very interesting, very incidental anecdote. I had two young women who showed my wife and I around and toured with us. And one of them worked for the government. And she was very, very lovely and very nice, and would send me presents for 2 or 3 years, and that was great. And then the news came out that there was a prohibition on homosexuality, that the Russians were cracking down, that the government was cracking down on homosexuality. And I wrote her an email and said, "What do you think about that?" And I was closed off. I was cut off. I was no longer allowed to communicate with her. So that's when things start to change,
The government hasn't watched
yes.
the show.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure being able to talk to you. In terms of your collection of action figures, do you have any particular genres or favorite, kinds that you collect?
No, I don't. And I don't collect action figures. I don't collect figures that are articulated.
Okay.
Because they look like articulated figures, I like them to look like sculptures. But, I collect real old Disney stuff. I collect Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. I don't even know who these characters are. But in addition, there were characters from comic strips called Gasoline Alley and the Gumps, Andy Gump, Mutt and Jeff, a whole slew of characters that were popular in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. And so anything to do with any of those old characters, I have an affinity for.
So things like porcelains, or are they, what kind of figurines are they?
They're not personal. It's just the hobby, I mean, it's personal. It's my hobby, but I don't relate to any of them in particular. Okay.
Thank you very much.
I don't think of myself as being Mandrake the magician, but.
So I guess my one disappointment with Babylon 5 is that the theatrical film never managed to get off the ground. I know there were a couple of scripts, and then there's all sorts of things with the riots, and unfortunately some of the actors have passed away. So do you think there's still any chance for a theatrical film?
Wow. Again, I have a real problem hearing you. Could you speak up?
Sorry, I was just asking about if you thought there was any chance for a Babylon 5 theatrical film to come out, because I know that there was a lot of problems with the riots, and now actors have passed away, so I don't know if it could really happen now, but still kind of hoping for it.
I think the time has passed. There was a time when they were talking about a theatrical film.
Yeah, there were at least two versions of a script, I know. I don't know if you ever got to read it. But.
No, I did not. I do know that at one point Joe Straczynski called me and said, "Are you available to do a film about the telepath wars?" And they had that in the works. And I said, yes, absolutely. But they did a couple of they did some DVDs.
Yeah, there's some straight-to-DVD movies, which are okay, but...
I never saw those. I was supposed to be part of the ensemble in the sequel, the Crusades sequel.
Yeah, I was disappointed that
Yeah, in
got
fact,
canceled.
I had memorized the dialogue. I had an interesting episode that they were going to do. It was like the third episode, and I think they did 1 or 2, so we never quite got to the one I was supposed to be in.
Yeah.
But just for the sake of conversation, it was after the telepath wars were over, and we had lost.
Yeah.
And I was sort of a maverick character, just hanging out. And the new crew came to me, and they needed my help to find somebody who they were after, a criminal. and I gave them the information in exchange for a shuttlecraft. And I did not explain to them, I, being Bester, did not explain
Right.
to them why I needed the shuttlecraft. But the last scene is I'm in my shuttlecraft. We've completed the agreement, and I'm off in space. And I look up, and the point of view was of the mothership. So I was going to see the other telepaths. So it was going to be a story that continued with these outcast telepaths, which would have been incredible fun for me, but we were canceled.
Yeah. Straczynski actually published some books with that unaired script in it, so that is kind of out there.
Oh,
but
is it?
yeah,
Oh.
But yeah, it's actually. But yeah, it is quite a cliffhanger, so don't quite know what happens after that.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have anything else, or should I do my song and dance? I don't really have a song and dance. Yes, thank you. Coming to the rescue.
Well, first, thank you. I've seen you at a couple of cons, and you're just a wonderful human being.
Whoa,
And,
you're
you know,
really low.
I had a question about your hobby with your memorabilia. Does that interest extend to pulps and pulp magazines?
No.
No. Okay.
No, the pulp magazines were really before my time. I mean, that's like the 30s, mostly 30s.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering if you were
Oh, yeah, I do
going
have-
back with
I do have-
comics that
but,
far.
yeah, but see, the figures that I collect, even though some of them are from the 30s and 20s, they're still relatable to me as comic figures and comic memorabilia.
Thank-
Pulp magazines, I never got into.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
So my question is,
Talk slowly because we got some time to fill.
okay. So my question comes back to Star Trek. If there's any scene or episode that was your favorite, and any scene or episode that was your least favorite or wasn't too much fun to
Oh, that's
film.
okay. That's a good question. Favorite, probably, aside from the improvised scene, which was fun to do, I very much enjoyed the scene that I did with the FBI agents in that same film. I liked the whole script of Spectre of the Gun, playing the cowboy and getting killed. By the way, there is a really egregious mistake in that episode that I don't know what possessed me to bring to the attention of the production team, because it could have meant the sacrifice of my character in that episode. But the whole idea, remember Spectre of the Gun? Yeah. It was about illusion. And if you believe what you're seeing, then it's true. But if you know that it isn't true, that it is an illusion, then you can't be hurt by it. Well, that conclusion was reached after Chekhov is shot and killed. So the point being then that he should have stayed dead. And my need for some kind of literary truth, for want of a better word, compelled me to tell the editor of the episode, after we had shot that scene, that this is not really logical for the character to be alive at the end of the episode. He should have died. And he says, yeah, we know that, but we said, the hell with it. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
One of my best friends used to live in Alameda.
Did he?
And she said anytime that someone, obviously a Trekker or Trekkie, would find out that she lived in Alameda, they would always ask her about the nuclear vessels.
Of course.
And when I was there, she actually took me to see them.
Oh, good.
And I apologize if this is asked already. I unfortunately arrived late. But I was just wondering if you might have a few words to say about Celeste Yarnell, who unfortunately we just lost.
Yeah. Well, first of all, she was a very beautiful girl. I remember that when we shot the scenes, the kissing scenes, I found my head being turned with my face my back to the camera, so that we saw more of Celeste than we did of me, which was probably a good thing. She was, as much as I knew of her, and much as I knew about her, you know, I would meet her at conventions. We got along well. She was a friendly person. I did not know her well enough to talk extensively, but I certainly have nothing bad to say about her. She was always very nice to me.
It was kind of nice that Chekhov got the girl for once.
Yeah, we got the girl 2 or 3 times, as I recall.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi there. I'm a big fan of Star Trek as well. Loved your work. Just curious about the relationships off camera when you guys were filming.
I can't hear you. My relationships with who?
Just the relationships with your other characters off camera while you were filming Star Trek.
Wow.
Or
You're getting into heavy territory now. You really are. You really are. And since they're not here to defend themselves, and I'm quite serious about that, I've decided in my dotage that it's not fair. The feelings that I have that are perhaps somewhat negative are not fair to expound upon when they're not here to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So you can read between the lines there and make the determination that I'm not crazy about some of them. But I think it's the best thing I can do is say nothing.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah. However, I do have one story about George, which is kind of funny, I think. So we're making, I'll be right with you. We're making The Voyage Home, and they're doing a scene where Sulu, Scotty, and McCoy are walking down the street in San Francisco. And George, it was a real street. We were, shooting on location, and evidently at one point they passed a tavern, and they were shooting this at 11 o'clock in the morning. And George decided it would be his piece of business to look in at the tavern as he passed by. And when he looked in during the rehearsal, there was a woman, 11 o'clock in the morning, sitting on a stool drinking, And he'd look in at her, and she'd turn and go. So that was nice. And they did this, rehearsed it 3 or 4 times, and each time he'd look in, and she'd turn and look at him and wave. She couldn't be seen, of course, on camera. So then they said, action, and George came down, looked in the tavern window, and the woman goes, oh my. I think it's a great story. Yes.
Yeah, this is kind of along the lines of that. So Voyage Home was my favorite of the original series Star Trek movies. Is it because it was comedic, and I love comedy? Is the tone of the movies, do you find reflective? Was being on the set of Voyage Home more amusing than being on the set of one of the more serious Con? Or
Oh, that's an interesting question. No, I think when they say cut, and you go back to being who you are, you go back to being who you are, regardless. I mean, I think if it was a situation in the extreme where you were really being tortured, either physically or mentally, it might be an afterlife to that, a shelf life to that you have to shake off, even after the camera stopped running. But the environment was generally the same for all the films we did. My concern, and I'm not going to go into detail because I swore I wouldn't, and this is not a negative thing. My concern was with Star Trek V in advance. Because there had been problems, and because Mr. Shatner was the director, I didn't know what to anticipate. And I told the other supporting actors that if there was going to be difficulties, if it was going to be uncomfortable, I was prepared to walk off the set. And I said, you don't have to support me on this, I just want to let you know. Well, to the contrary, Bill couldn't have been more forthcoming and giving and generous. In fact, it became a little uncomfortable. I'd say, aye, Captain, and he'd go, whoa, that was good.
Thank you, Mr. Koenig. You're a treasure.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Koenig. At this point, looking back on your career, are there any roles on stage or in movies that you would like to have played that you didn't get the opportunity to?
Yeah, one in particular, and it's one. You're telling me we don't have much time? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? 1 minute?
2 minutes.
8 minutes. This is the last question, folks. Yeah, and my choice is going to surprise you. They were looking. I don't know if you know who Charles Manson was. Yeah. He was a very bad guy, and he had a cult around him of followers. And this was back in the 60s. And they killed people. They killed people, and they all went to prison. And I think he just passed away quite recently. But they wanted to do his life story. And the book that had been written about him by the DA, district attorney, I think, had been called Helter Skelter. Yeah. And I think that was part of the lyrics from a Beatles song, and Manson made it part of his conversation or part of his slogan or whatever. So it was going to be a 2-part movie for television. They couldn't find anybody in Los Angeles to play the part. Anybody they thought was right. And finally, a casting director mentioned my name, and then another casting director mentioned my name, and that was enough to prompt the director to at least have me in. But the director had known me, not personally, but through some writing that I had done. But he grudgingly had me come in. He says, okay, here's a monologue. Read it, come back. He says, don't memorize it. Don't try to do Charles Manson's voice or anything. Just come back and I'll audition you. So coincidentally, at the time, there was a documentary playing about the Manson family, and was playing in a drive-in. And I took a tape recorder to a drive-in, and I recorded his voice from beginning to end. I went home. I did exactly what the director told me not to do. I memorized the part, and I worked on the voice and worked on the voice. And I came back, and it was his office, and he was at his desk. And I said, can I have a minute to get ready for this? He said, sure, go ahead. And he put his head down, and he started writing. And then, and it was not by design, but when I felt ready, I started to talk as Manson. And so he heard me before he even saw me. And when he looked up, it was, oh my God, that's Charlie Manson. And it was just a remarkable moment. And it was, Manson is in court at the time, was testifying. So he said to me, you're the guy I'm looking for. You're the guy I'm looking for. And I went away from that thinking, wow, this is amazing. I've got this extraordinary role. My wife wasn't happy about me doing it because people had already been threatening some of the CBS executives who were putting this together. There had been threats. But I thought, what an opportunity, not only how challenging, but how it was going to change my whole persona in the industry. That they're going to see me not only as this guy with a funny, somewhat inaccurate dialect, but as an actor of some depth. Well, they didn't find anybody else in L.A., but they found, do you know the name Elia Kazan?
Yes.
Well, for those of you who do, Elia Kazan was the foremost director of his time. He did Rebel Without a Cause. He did East of Eden. No, he didn't. He did East of Eden. He did a bunch of movies with Warren Beatty. He did the movie with Andy Griffith. He was considered the best director around, and he was part of the Actors Studio and worked with Marlon Brando on The Waterfront. People are all so young, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But anyway, take my word for it. Yeah. Well, he had worked with another actor in a film, and he recommended him. And they went with him. I mean, he worked with Elia Kazan, and he was good. That was the thing. I didn't want to watch it because I was afraid, and so they cast him. They found an actor in New York. I didn't want to watch it because I didn't want to see it being done badly. So I didn't watch the first episode, but I did watch the second, and I was so relieved that he was good, that he had really taken up the challenge and done a good performance. And I didn't. Otherwise, I would have felt cheated. But that's the part I would have liked to play, that I had an opportunity to do, and it didn't work out.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay.